Let me say, first of all, how extremely happy I am to be here. This has been for me, I've been in India now about 5 weeks. And I have traveled in India many times since the last almost 25, 30 years, either taking pilgrims to places holy to these masters in the way that Daya and Keshava do now. Before they were doing it, my husband and our friends, we were doing that. And then after Swami Kriyananda moved to India in 2003, I've come many times to see him, either in his home in Gurgaon or often we would meet in Goa. And at the same time, for many years of my life, I have been sharing Master's teachings, primarily through the temple that my husband and I are responsible for in Palo Alto, California, Silicon Valley, south of San Francisco, where I'm sure all of you have relatives, or at least somebody that you know. But this last June, Swami Kriyananda said to me, you know, at this point in my life, he asked me to think very differently about my life. And whereas I have been responsible for that one temple with my husband for 25 years, he said essentially, leave that responsibility with him and with others, and think more as if I was responsible for the whole planet. And this year has been a time of trying to understand how best to express it. And then he and Narayani suggested that I come to India as I am now, from just after Master's birthday to just after his Mahasamadhi, a perfect period of time. So for the first time, I've been traveling in India, something familiar to me. I've been sharing Master's teachings, but I put them together. And for me, what that's meant is that I have come to know my brothers and sisters in India, my Guru Bhais, and dear friends from past incarnations and new friends from this incarnation in a way that I never had the opportunity to do before. And it's thrilling. That's all I can say. We have said jokingly sometimes that we are the nation of self-realization. And we carry many different passports, and you have to show them when you go through the airport. But our true passport unifies all of us. And coming down these stairs, I was insisting with Brian, who does the camera for us and makes the film so we can put everything on the internet. Almost everything that I do, we post on the internet, and everybody can watch it for free all over the world, and he's been kind enough to continue that. But when we came in and I saw the sign and I saw the stairs coming down, I asked, oh, please take the camera upstairs and show everyone where we are. And this is part of the reason. I'll tell this story first. Many years ago, it was actually after my husband and I got married, we took our honeymoon with Swami Kriyananda, or the first part of our honeymoon. We went on a lecture tour with him in Europe. That would have been 1982. And we were in Italy. I don't speak a word of Italian. I don't speak a word of Italian. My husband speaks less, if you can say such a thing. So we were completely, and we were separated from anyone who did speak English, hosted by people we couldn't talk to. And we were going to a place, it turned out later, where they wanted to build a retreat. But all we knew is we drove for hours. We went way out in the country. We found a building that was old and slightly decrepit. We were taken up these very narrow stairs. We actually had to bend over to go into the room. And when we got in, there were the pictures of the masters, and people were singing Door of My Heart in Italian. And on a very real level, I realized at that point, we're all one soul. We're all one spirit. But even though you can say that, when you actually experience it, as I know your family here in this aspect of Master's work knows, the bonds that you form with each other. And through our shared attunement with the Masters, the bonds that you'll form with people all over the planet that you've never yet met, the friendships that we have because of our attunement to Master are fulfilling on a level that nothing else in life can touch. So all of that is to say, I'm extremely happy to be here. And whatever I may be able to share with you of Master's teachings, I promise you, you've already given me more back. And it's my honor to do that for you. Now, without more words, let's take a moment and do a little bit of chanting. First, we'll open with a prayer, then we'll have a little bit of chanting, a few moments of silence, and we'll go into what our subject is tonight. So please pray with me. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Guru, Paramhansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, humbly we bow to all. We are your children. Guide us and bless us. And bring us quickly and safely out of delusion and into thy infinite bliss. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. So let's have a chant. The subject that we're talking about tonight is the subject of Kundalini. And the obvious question is how to raise it, because if we understand what Kundalini is, we understand the point is that we want it higher and better in our system. I'm going to start from a bigger perspective, because sometimes the real answer to a small question is in the bigger point of view. All of us incarnate into a physical body because we have something that we don't yet understand about how to remain in a state of perfect bliss. The word that can be applied to that is the word karma, but there are many definitions of the word karma, and a very good definition of the word karma is unlearned lesson. And it's unlearned in relationship to our true nature and our true potential for happiness. When Master first came to America, which is really where his work was defined, he came to America to establish his work because America had very little tradition to interfere. America is such a new country, 200 years old, or just a little more than that. I was raised in America. I didn't travel outside of the US until after I got married. My husband's travel karma just swept me into it. And after I married him, we went off to Europe, and I've been traveling ever since, but I didn't have a passport until we got married. So I was 34 when I married, and I went for the first time to Italy, and to anywhere, but I went to Italy. And I discovered that ancient countries, at least older than America, have all this tradition behind them. And I was astonished that the people in Florence thought they were really special because Michelangelo had lived in Florence. And as an American, I couldn't even understand what that had to do with them. Michelangelo had lived such a long time ago, but with the tradition behind them, it defined their attitudes and much of their reality. Of course, India is much more ancient, and many traditions define your reality, which is positive and also negative, because it holds people and thoughts in a pattern when sometimes that pattern no longer serves, but the sheer weight of all that tradition remains and has to be dealt with. Well, I realized after traveling and seeing many other countries how ideally suited America was for the planting of a whole new expression of Sanatana Dharma. Master never said he was bringing a new religion or something that had never been heard of before, but when asked, he said it's a new expression. And because America was essentially a blank slate in terms of Sanatana Dharma, Christianity being true Sanatana Dharma in its origins had become so distorted over time that it really was a blank slate. In fact, Master said, in India, they know it's very difficult to realize God, so people are sometimes a little reluctant to take it on. In America, they had no idea how hard it was, so they just said, sure, we can do that. And to a certain extent, that sort of foolish, seemingly, attitude made it more possible to move forward. Well, when we come to words like Kundalini and karma and so on, here there's a lot of tradition about it. And so what I can offer you is what Master taught Swami Kriyananda and what Swami Kriyananda taught me. And I find the simplicity of what they taught me from my experience of people with a broader understanding. Sometimes my simple understanding cuts through a certain amount. So let's think of karma, in this case, as unlearned lessons. I was starting to say, when Master came to America, he wanted to present this extremely complex teaching in a way that would satisfy the unique characteristics of the American mind. Very practical, scientific, likes a certain simplicity. So he wrote a book at that time which he called The Science of Religion. It was actually ghost-written. It was his ideas, but he didn't speak English that well, so someone else wrote it into English. Swami Kriyananda never liked the way it was put into English, so he rewrote the book and called it God is for Everyone. It's a very, very good book. The premise of it is very simple. Master said, there are two realities in life: the desire to escape pain, however we define pain, the desire to experience bliss, and a lesser reality of bliss is happiness. A lesser reality than that even is pleasure. But nonetheless, it's two directions. On one side, what we think of causes us suffering. On the other side, what we think of is causing us happiness. And every conscious creature, even down to a worm or a rat, they'll behave according to that. Where the rat gets an electric shock, where he gets food, he'll follow where he gets food, he'll avoid where he gets the shock. If you take a worm and stick it with a pin, it'll try to get away from the pin. It has like very little self-awareness, but it can tell the difference between pleasure and pain, because that is the fundamental reality. Now, the reason we are pulled so strongly toward our understanding of positive bliss is because that's what we're made of. And we know that on some level. It's not necessarily a conscious level, but somehow we know that our destiny is bliss. And therefore, if we're not experiencing that, there's something wrong. And we need to make another choice that'll move us closer toward that bliss. Now, many of those choices are stunningly misguided, just almost unbelievably misguided. And that's what you see people doing all around you, doing things that will never bring them happiness. But somewhere in the confusion of their karmic pattern, they think that this action will bring them that result. And that qualifies perfectly as an unlearned lesson. That the truth is that this will not take you to bliss, but the only way you're going to find that out is by doing it. One of the premises of self-realization that is fundamental is that it is based on your actual experience. It is not a set of dogmas that you memorize. It's what you find to be true from your own experience. I'm laughing for a moment because I hope this will translate. Let's see. I'll try it. There was someone who came to our temple in Palo Alto, and she came and she brought her small child with her, like an 8-year-old girl, and the girl went into our Sunday school. And then a couple of days later, the mother overheard the child telling her child friend that they were going to a new church, and she'd learned about Master the child had at the new church. She said, we're going to a new church, and now we believe in Parmesan Yugoslavia. That's what she said. That's how she'd heard Paramahansa Yogananda. We believe in Parmesan Yugoslavia now. But in many ways, that's how many spiritual paths are. What do we believe? And we study these dogmas, and that becomes what we believe. We Jews believe, we Catholics believe, we Hindus believe, whatever it might be. Master said, it's not a question of what you believe, it's what you actually experience. Now, I had a totally ridiculous experience about experience, but I will share it to you because it really taught me something. My husband and I each have our own car because that's what we need where we live. His car happens to be newer than mine because he drives more, and he takes better care of his car than I take care of mine. Let's just be very honest. And whenever we have traveled and I've had like a little satchel or something like that, I've had an inclination before I put it in the car to set it on the hood and then move it off to the car. He has always said to me, don't put your bag on the car, it'll scratch the hood. So because it's not worth arguing with him, I always set it on the hood. Then he says no, or I'll start to set it on the hood, and he'll stop me and I'll put it inside. This has been going on for about 25 years. Not so long ago, I borrowed his car because I had to take a trip up to Ananda village, which is our main ashram, which is about 4 hours from where our ashram is. And his car is more comfortable, so I borrowed his car. And I was visiting Durga and Vidura, who used to live in Gurgaon. Some of you know them. They're very close friends of ours. And because my husband wasn't there, I took my satchel and I put it on the hood, and I did what I needed to do, and then because it was a little heavy, I slid it off. And of course, the little metal feet on the bottom of the canvas satchel scratched a big W on the hood, just exactly as he told me it would. And I looked at it, as stupid as it sounds. I said, oh, the suitcase will scratch the hood, just like that. Look at that. And skillfully, I got Vidura, who's a very good friend with my husband David, to call my husband and tell him that I had scratched the hood of his car before I got home. Because I said, you two men will think it's a joke. And so by the time I get home, he'll be smiling about it. It worked great because Vidura made him think I had destroyed the car. So when he finally just saw the little squiggle, all of that is completely ridiculous. Except I never believed that canvas satchel could scratch the hood of a car until I scratched it myself. And it just taught me so much about karma. Because you can tell someone, it is crystal clear to you that the action they are taking will not bring them happiness, but if it's an unlearned lesson, they will never know it until they learn it. And that is why we incarnate so many times. When we begin to become more receptive, it is possible to learn from each other's experience. But somewhere in there, it always has to connect with you. I have actually been a much better counselor and assistant to others since I scratched the hood of my husband's car, because I'm no longer so confused by the fact that merely because I tell them, they still don't understand, right? Because it has to come from within you. Now, when our physical body dies, the accumulated karma is registered in the chakras as a magnetic pattern of energy vibrating at a certain level of consciousness. All of those unlearned lessons make a pattern. We live in that astral body in the astral world for as long as we are content there. But sooner or later, the longings for what we think are going to make us happy, that can only be experienced through a material body, draw us back into a material body. And sometimes we think it was a really dumb thing to have done, but those forces are often functioning on a much lower than conscious level. I think of it like this. Let's say you've decided that you have a night off, and so tonight you're going to read 3 chapters in the essence of self-realization. Then you're going to chant for half an hour, then you'll do your kriyas, maybe at the end you'll do another energization exercise, you'll meditate for an hour, you have a whole evening plan. So you start reading the book, and it occurs to you that, well, you're a little bit hungrier than you thought you were. Dinner didn't really satisfy. And there's not that much in the kitchen. But if I just go down the block to that takeout place where they have such a really good whatever it is, then I'll be able to do it. So you go downstairs to the takeout place, and then you bump into a friend. And the friend says, oh, don't bother here. There's better food over there. We're all going to go over there. And then you go over there and you have that dinner, and then you go out walking and you go visit a few other friends. And like midnight, you come home. There's the harmonium. There's the Gita book. There's your Kriya Mala. And like somewhere when you started out in one direction, you just got sucked off into another direction. My personal belief is that's what happens to us in the astral world. We're very comfortable, everything is really nice. And then all of a sudden we remember, how nice it would be to have apple pie, which we may not be able to have in the astral world. Or maybe we see a good friend who's taken a body over there. Or maybe this woman here who was the mother of my friend, who was such a good mother to my friend, it looks like she's about to conceive a child. Maybe I could be her child. Whatever it might be, we have this belief that those circumstances will give me greater happiness than I already have. And so that's the karma that pulls us back into a physical body, so we get to experience for ourselves exactly how much happiness it will give us. Swami Kriyananda said something very important to me at one point. It wasn't just for me, but it was a very important statement. He said, we learn something from having our desires disappointed. We learn something from that, but we learn more from having them fulfilled, which is a very important thought to keep in mind, because until we have experienced it ourselves, It doesn't matter who has told us that it won't satisfy us, we never quite believe it. But once you have experienced it for yourself, it's not necessarily that it's sour by any means. You know, in my own life, I've had a very happy marriage, and I've very much enjoyed being married to my husband. He's a very fine man. We've been good partners for each other. And I know how much fulfillment can come from that, which is something, but it's not everything. You know, it's still not enough compared to the perfect bliss that the heart longs for. If I was always longing for that and never had it, no one could tell me that. Do you see what I mean? I mean, I don't think that's a new lesson for me. I think I entered into the marriage with a great deal of that already understood. But nonetheless, you know, maybe you want to be beautiful. Maybe you want to be rich. Maybe you want to be powerful in your job. When you experience it, you find out that it's something. It's not nothing, but it's still not enough. Okay? Now, in order to manifest a physical body, which is the master says that when the sperm and the ovum come together, there's a flash of light in the astral world, and all those souls ready to incarnate who are in tune with that flash rush to try to get in. That was how he put it. It sounds so funny to me when he says that. I have a picture of a street bazaar where there's a real bargain and everybody's pushing, trying to get to it. He said, and sometimes 2 or 3 will make it in at the same time. When I told this to a friend of mine, she told me this story about her own son. He was a grown man at that time, but when he was 6, he became very angry at his mother, as children can do, over some discipline that she was imposing upon him. And as children sometimes shout, children can be ruder in America than they are in India, but he said to her, "I hate you," like that. And then he stomped away. And she wasn't really hurt. She knew he was just having a tantrum. But then that wasn't enough. So he turned back and he said to her, "You weren't even my first choice." That's what he said to her. And she became very interested. She said, "Who was your first choice, dear?" He said, "A lady in the Philippines, but she was taken." So she'd always had that in her mind as just a delightful moment with her son. Then when I told her this, she started to laugh and laugh. She said her son has a fatal character flaw. He'll make a strong determination that he wants to do something, but before he acts, he tends to hesitate. She could just see him in the astral world, seeing the flash of light for the lady in the Philippines, starting to go for it, then hesitating for a moment and finding himself stuck with her. But then what happens to us, if you look at the little photographs of the developing fetus and the developing embryo, Master says the sperm and ovum come together, and they come together right here at the medulla. And this is the one part of the body that can't be operated on, it can't be touched, because this is where the soul and ego meet. This is the source of ego. Ego is the infinite soul identified with the physical body. The soul doesn't become limited, but it identifies with it, and that's what ego is. Ego is when the infinite self identifies with the temporary self and becomes a little confused. And it starts right here at the medulla. It's a very interesting fact. That's why people who are egotistical often pull their heads up like this. People who are proud look down their noses at people. And you see, if you watch movie stars and popular singers, they often throw their heads around a lot like that. it's like they're having an ego spasm right here, and it flips their head from side to side. It's really quite extreme in people who are very ego-oriented. Then what happens is from that one cell, if you look, as I said, at the picture of the developing fetus, the next thing that happens is that a little potato stick, a little toothpick develops. One thing, that's the first thing that happens, because that's the chakras, that's the spine. That from here, the energy extends all the way out to the first chakra, which is the earth chakra, which represents physical manifestation. And it has to extend, the spirit has to enter in, and then it has to extend all the way to the earth chakra, else you don't have a physical body. Now, there is this compelling force that pushes us into matter, and that's our karma. All the things that we think will give us the happiness that we long for, that can be experienced when you have a physical body. So we make a physical body in order to have those experiences, and so that, and on a higher level, our soul says, so that you can learn where true fulfillment comes from. But it's not such a terrible thing. It's an unlearned lesson. It's neither good nor bad. It's just something we don't yet know. And that's what we're dealing with. So all of the longing that those unlearned lessons represent. I asked Swami Kriyananda once about karma. I had a certain confusion in my mind, and he said, what causes the karma that causes us to reincarnate, if you're looking over your life, is, he said, all those things that we think of that awaken in our heart either a feeling of longing or a feeling of regret. Either those things that we still wish to experience, or those things that cause us a negative sense of failure when we contemplate them. Longing and regret. Those are the two attitudes that all unlearned lessons fall into, those realities. And then we are forced to reincarnate. It's a very important template to lay over your life if you really want to think about it. If you're still longing for it, or if you regret it, if you can't let it go. In other words, if you've identified with your failures and you can't let it go, that will also draw you back. I mean, and that regret can also be anger. I want revenge. I regret that this terrible thing happened and I want to make it right. You know, regret just means it's not a positive, but it's still also unfinished. So you can see how powerful that force is if we sit here and think about the things that we long for, or the things that we regret, that we wish to make right again, however we want to do that. And that's the force that impels us into a body. And that's the force when the sperm and ovum unite and the soul has committed itself to this particular body. It shoots all the way down to the bottom of the spine. It anchors itself in the earth chakra. The earth chakra represents, as I said, the form of things. The nature of matter, is that the form is fixed. It's not mutable. Once something is in physical form, that's the way it appears to us, at least. Now, all life energy, life force, is in fact Kundalini. And the spine becomes, once that little stick, the little toothpick is done, then the body begins to develop, and where the nerve plexus, the centers of the nerves are in the physical body, exactly correspond to where the chakras are in the astral body. The chakras are not at all physical, but because the presence of that energy is there, the astral body is like the blueprint. If you've ever been involved in any kind of construction, you'll be able to turn the pages of the blueprint and you'll be able to look at the building and you'll see everything about the building is on the blueprint, and the manifestation of the building comes out of the blueprint, but of course the blueprint is not the building. So the chakras, because they are the karmic pattern vibrationally, everything that comes out eventually as the physical body is in that blueprint. It has to be. It's the only way it can be done. There's also an exact correlation between the pattern of energy in the chakras and the planetary positions at the time of birth. Now, you have to be a very gifted astrologer to be able to read them properly, but if you can, the planets are a symbol. They don't actually cause it. What causes your destiny is your chakras. But there is the science of astrology is the science of yoga. And I can't explain this well. It's in the Raja Yoga book by Swami Kriyananda, the relationship of each chakra and the planetary rulers and all of those aspects. But you choose the exact moment to be born in which the planets, which symbolize your internal reality, in which it matches. Okay? So then the whole body comes out from that blueprint. It comes out male or female. You've chosen a genetic heritage. You've chosen a cultural heritage, a language heritage, a wealth or poverty. The position of your chakras and your unlearned lessons determine whether your body is healthy or injured, or all of those factors. Your DNA, your genetics are all caused by your karma. They don't create your karma, you choose them because they are the right context for you to express it. Now, what we're trying to do as human beings, as yogis, is we're trying to have the life force within us flow in harmony with our superconscious self, with our higher consciousness. In other words, we understand as we begin to learn, this is the point of divine awareness within the physical body, the point between the eyebrows, the spiritual eye. This is the positive pole of the medulla, which is ego, which is we either identify with ego, which is the infinite soul identifies with the limited conditions of the body, or we identify with the divine reality of which our individuality is but an expression. So the distance is between delusion and freedom is just the distance between the spiritual eye and the medulla. It's a very short distance. Okay? So what we're trying to do in our lives is we're trying to shift our identity from ego to Christ consciousness, from divine awareness. And we are trying to have all the energy flowing, all of our life force, which flows through the spine, which both physically and spiritually determines who we are. You know, the science of when things go wrong with the spine, things go wrong with the whole body. We want that energy to flow harmoniously and always be directed from the spiritual eye. Okay? Now, what happens is each of these chakras represents a vibration of awareness somewhere between perfect attunement with Christ consciousness and absolute commitment to matter as the only reality. And it's a spectrum of awareness. And just a second, I lost a thought. Let me find it. People talk a lot about the chakras being blocked. And it's a vocabulary word that sort of means something. But really, to my mind, a truer image is that the chakras actually have holes in them. They leak, is what they do. Now, for those of you who have Kriya, you understand how we circulate the energy through the chakras, trying to create an internal loop of energy that creates magnetism. that draws our consciousness inward and eventually causes our energy to rise. At all times, energy is flowing up and down the spine. The breath actually is the physical manifestation of the rising and falling currents in the spine. The inhalation is the breath coming in, the exhalation is the breath going out. Inhalation, and when the energy rises, it's a positive reality, it's an upward moving, uplifting. When the energy sinks, and now I'm not saying every single time it rises and sinks, happy, sad, like this. But as a fact, when we're uplifted, our energy always goes up. And you see it especially in children. When children get excited about something, this is what they do, because they can't contain themselves. The energy is going up. And when children are depressed about something, they'll often throw themselves on the ground, won't they? They just can't even stay upright. The energy has gone so far down. And for adults who are a little more restrained, if you're excited about something, this is always your posture, isn't it? I got a first on the exam. It really came out perfectly. I got the job. Oh, I just think I messed it up so badly. And we crash like that, isn't that so? So what we're trying to do, let me say one other part of this. Each of these chakras, on its own level, represents an understanding of reality. A perfect understanding of reality is to know we are one with the infinite. I will act in perfect harmony with divine guidance. And that's where my fulfillment comes from. But all of these unlearned lessons tell us that my fulfillment will come from self-will. My fulfillment will come from emotional expression. My fulfillment will come from sexuality. My fulfillment will come from imposing my will on the world. Those are just random thoughts of commitments on the spectrum between the divine and the material. And what happens is, instead of this energy, because we have to, every chakra contributes to the balance of our lives. Every chakra has a positive, an uplifting, an expansive, and a contractive way of expressing itself. Let's say the earth chakra. I can't do them all in this short session, but the earth chakra represents the capacity to be committed, the capacity to be loyal, the capacity to plant your feet, set a course, and walk it. You have to have that quality. You can't live unless the earth chakra is dynamic, and you can't live successfully. But the earth chakra can also represent rigidity, fanaticism, the inability to accept change, a contractive, narrow definition of everything. Okay, now all the chakras, earth, water, fire, air, all of them contribute. It's a whole fascinating study. But when the earth chakra is guided from the spiritual eye, then all the positive realities of the quality of earth become the servant of higher consciousness. And so when the chakra is appropriately energized, the energy circulates through the earth chakra, and then the positive qualities of the earth chakra rise on that energy and then are utilized by the individual for his own benefit and for the benefit of the world in harmony with this reality. If that chakra is determined to thrust its energy out on a level other than harmony with this chakra, that is an unlearned lesson. Okay? So let's say that the earth chakra also represents security. And it does represent security. True security comes from our relationship with God. Some of you were present last night when I was talking about courage and confidence. The only possible way to have real courage and confidence is because your security comes from your relationship to God and your certainty that everything in your life is sent to you by God, and therefore, what is there to fear? That's the right expression of this energy. If, however, that energy goes out on a lower plane, my security comes from money in the bank, a house that I own, people who will do what I want. And you sort of see people who think like that, often. Their houses will be big, their furniture will be heavy, their cars will be big, strong cars. Sometimes such people also have big bodies, but I don't want to make any stereotypes. But it's just this thought. And so instead of the energy circulating upward, my point of view is it leaks outward. It just goes out on its own level instead of supporting where our true happiness comes from. It is an unlearned lesson that we are compelled to follow through until our own experience tells us this isn't really bringing me what I want. Master says, everything that you are no longer inclined to do, you have already done in the past. And the reason you're not doing it now is because you experienced it completely and you know it won't bring you what you want. That means you're not a murderer anymore, you're not a thief anymore, you're not a drug addict anymore. It's a little scary when you think about it. But then there are all those sort of cuspy things that are right on the edge. I'm nice most of the time. I bought a car once from this man who he seemed barely human in a certain sense. He had these really reflective sunglasses on, and it was just a business deal. I'm going to give you the car, here's the car, you can buy it if you want it, here's the paper. So just like that. And I paid cash. When I pulled out the money, the man took off his glasses, he became really animated, he became real friendly. The sight of the money just meant so much to him that it was like the first time he became alive was at the sight of the money. It was like I'd never even imagined that kind of interest in money, that the paper itself would get him so interested. It's a deep, unlearned lesson for that man. And he's going to spend a lot of lifetimes questing after that money until he experiences what it will and will not give him. Now, I'm going to use the word Kundalini 45 minutes into this talk for the third or fourth time. But everything that I've said is about why it's difficult to raise the Kundalini. Because raising the Kundalini doesn't just mean getting a fragment of it to sort of shoot up your spine. It means to liberate your life force from all of the dissipations of it that our unlearned lessons keep sucking away from us. We commit ourselves to the spiritual path. This is the way I think about it. We commit ourselves to the spiritual path. The energy comes in through the medulla. That's how Master describes it. That's the energization exercises, which many of you know. And it circulates through all the chakras, like this. But if we have pre-commitments in a lot of those chakras, we'll bring in a certain force of energy, but by the time it circulates, it's like an ice cube. There's the story that's told, the king asked, "Why do I collect so many taxes but have so little money in my treasury?" And the minister says, "Let me give you an illustration." And he takes an ice cube and he puts it in the hand of one man sitting at the table, and the ice cube is passed around the whole table. And by the time it gets back to the king, of course, the warmth of everybody's hands has diminished the size of the ice cube. And what he's saying is the taxes are collected, but everybody takes a little piece off before it comes to you. Now that's what happens. We draw life force in, but when we start circulating that life force, all of those karmic commitments, all of those regrets and longings take a little piece of that energy And when we finally get back to the spiritual eye, we don't have quite as much as we thought we were going to have for our divine intention. So the process of raising Kundalini is conscious living, right living, and the effort at all times to eagerly, attentively, honestly, energetically pay attention to our regrets and longings, pay attention to our life experience, and apply that life experience in terms of liberating ourselves from the necessity to have to go through all this. Because by definition, the fewer vrittis of karma that you're running in your chakras, the more easily the energy will flow, and the more energy will flow. Now, there's other factors in relation to that, and all of this is about Kriya Yoga. Kriya Yoga meaning not just the final point of initiation, but everything that you learn in the context of these masters, because it's all about raising the Kundalini by redirecting our attention inward and by utilizing what you would call the spiritual physiology here. Because the karma is held in vrittis, which are whirlpools, and there is some motivating thought at the center, and that motivating thought creates, by our repeated commitment to that, it creates a vortex of energy, such as, let's say, I saw a picture in the newspaper of a movie star in America. And she was stunningly attractive. And it wasn't just her face, it was like everything about her was profoundly committed to being a magnetic person in a female way and draw that energy. And I thought, how many lifetimes has this person concentrated on that one reality in order to get that strong? Swami Kriyananda mentioned once that he was on a cruise ship, and there was a woman on the ship who was a model. And in some context or another, she shook his hand or something like that, and he said this jolt of female magnetism came out of her. He didn't say, it wasn't sexuality, it was just female magnetism. And that's what gave her that power when she stood up in her female body to attract all this attention. So that's the center point. I want to be a supermodel. I want to be a Bollywood star. I want to be Miss Universe. So you have to watch the flash of light in the universe, in the astral world. You have to be sure and pick, the parents who have the right genetic structure. You have to get the people who will help you learn that. You have to fail repeatedly and keep trying. All of these different factors are the center point that cause a great many other things to happen, right? Now, if you could dissolve that center point, then it doesn't really matter how much energy was gathered around it, because as soon as that central thought is dissolved, then everything else dissipates immediately. It's exactly like a river running and a whirlpool like this. If whatever is creating that whirlpool is removed, all of that energy automatically goes right back to the river, right? Now, Kriya Yoga, as a practice, because it works with the spiritual physiology of the chakras, dissolves the center point of those whirlpools. And it dissolves those center points as an exact energetic relationship. If you do your kriyas with really low energy and really low concentration and no particular power and no devotion and no commitment, your kriyas have about that much energy. So they can only dissolve center points of the vrittis that have this much energy. So you're not really making a lot of progress. If you do your kriyas with an enormous amount of committed energy, what that is that's moving energy in the river, because you see, The whirlpool can be dissolved either by pulling out the center, which is to say, I have learned that I no longer want to be a Bollywood star, it was a terrible experience, and you let go of that and you make yourself as homely as you can for the next 100 lifetimes so you won't ever be tempted again. That's one way. The other way is, if the river flows strong enough, every whirlpool that is weaker than the flow of the river will automatically be dissolved in it. And that is the essence of what Kriya does. It increases the flow of the river so the vrittis are automatically released and all that energy is given to you. So raising the Kundalini, as I was starting to say a moment ago, comes from conscious living, consciously working as well as you can with all of the tools that I don't have to reiterate because it's the entire spiritual path of right attitude, right devotion, right action, all of that. And also by doing those practices which increase the flow of the river, which are meditation, especially the principles of Kriya Yoga, which work with the metaphysics. But you see, another way also to increase the flow of the river is by self-offering at the spiritual eye. In other words, the power of devotion. And that's why Kriya practice is so intimately connected with discipleship and with devotional practices. Because when you really love something, all of your energy goes there automatically and you don't have to work at it. Isn't that so? Parents of a newborn child cannot take their mind off that child no matter how hard they try. You just can't. It's what you think about all the time. So how should we love God? With the most determined, passionate love that we can possibly imagine, because then all our energy flows there. And there's no inclination for it to go anywhere else. Raising the Kundalini is simply withdrawing the energy from that which keeps it from going upward to the spiritual eye. And it can be made much more esoteric than that, and it can be discussed in enormous detail, but fundamentally that is exactly and all that we're doing. Okay? We wanted to take some time at the end of this to have a blessing ceremony. With the size of the crowd, this is going to take us a few minutes. Do you think we should proceed with that thought? No, okay, I think the crowd is a little large for that thought. So why don't I take a few questions? Pankaj, did you have something you wanted to say?
Not really.
Mm-hmm.
So we have, we can take a few questions.
Okay.
And some more chanting if you want.
Okay.
If the questions stop coming.
Okay.
So we can continue to the
Okay. Thank you. Do I have any questions? Yes.
Doing advanced Kriya preparation, during that thing came up that the initial stages when the Kundalini is trying to raise, during meditation and something, and the body starts swaying.
Right.
Is that right? Is that wrong? Or I would like your thoughts on that.
The question is about when Kundalini starts rising, the body starts swaying. The way the Kundalini actually, it's called a serpent because it rises through the chakras in a circular pattern like this. And yes, often when it first begins to move in you, you'll find yourself going exactly like this. Swami Kriyananda says, it's not like you should stop it, but he said you should try to go, you should also not encourage it, because it's too easy for you to get distracted physically. But he said what one should do when the body moves like that is just try to concentrate ever more deeply at the center. And that if you deepen your concentration, rather than allow it to get distracted physically, then actually the energy will rise more.
It starts happening automatically.
It starts happening automatically, exactly. So don't try to stop it. Don't try to encourage it. Just try to become ever more still in the center of it. because that's the way to take the experience deeper, which is what you really want to have happen. It's interesting because the Jews have a practice, it's called davening. And when they literally hold their books and they recite their Hebrew prayers and they go like this, which undoubtedly came from people who were actually having Kundalini experience, who were doing that. So then they just started making it one of those ways that religion gets completely corrupted. So now they rock back and forth, which doesn't really do anything to raise the Kundalini. Okay? Okay?
Are there any mantras to help to raise Kundalini?
Well, all true mantras would help to raise Kundalini because they would draw the energy inward. They would increase the flow of the energy upward. They would magnetize you at the spiritual eye. And then to that extent, you would be withdrawing energy, shifting energy from outward karmic commitments to inward karmic commitments. And also, you see, the other way that we overcome karma is we feel a higher level of satisfaction, and the lower level of satisfaction is clearly not going to be what we thought it was. I've heard stories recently about, and I've heard them many times, people start meditating and suddenly they stop drinking, they stop carousing, they just stop doing things. They stop smoking cigarettes, they stop eating meat, and they never decide to stop. It's just, even if they don't even think that their meditations are that beautiful, they're finding the satisfaction within that they have been seeking in other ways, and the vibration of that desire is dissolved.
You have a living example.
Okay, I'm very glad of that. And you just don't want to do it anymore because you suddenly realize it does not bring me happiness, because I've experienced real happiness. Even if you haven't felt like you've had that much of an experience, you've shifted. So any true mantra with true power, anything that raises the energy, is going to have that effect.
Would you like to suggest anything?
You know, our path is not primarily mantra. Swamiji always suggests for japa that we simply say Om Guru, Om Guru. But you have Swami's recording, of course, of the Gayatri mantra and of the Mahamritryunjaya mantra. I'm not an expert, so I couldn't say beyond that. Okay. Yes?
When the Kundi got awakened, what one should do after?
Say it one more time, please.
When the Kundi got start awakening,
Right.
then what one should do then? Like.
Well, the question is when the Kundalini starts awakening, what should you do? If one is conscientiously following the teachings of Master, the rising of the Kundalini will happen in such a way that you don't really have a question like that. Because the Kundalini rising will be a balanced expansion of your joy in life and a balanced expansion of your sense of relationship to God and Guru, and a harmonious relationship with the world around you. If you feel that the Kundalini is rising in you in such a way as to create disbalance in your life, then it would be important to evaluate the totality of your practices and see how you might add balance to your spiritual practices. Maybe there is too much willpower and not enough devotion. Maybe there is too much devotion and not enough focus. Maybe there is too much thought about one's own spiritual development and not sufficient serving of others. Maybe there is too much concentration on my experiences and not enough awareness that everything is the grace of God and I need to focus more on gratitude rather than the experiences I'm having. I'm randomly suggesting something. I think it would be very difficult for most people to evaluate themselves. So long before that experience begins, an extremely helpful spiritual practice is to find in your life people whose impersonal spiritual wisdom you trust. And build relationships with people who, they don't have to be God realized. They don't even really have to be a lot more advanced than you. You just have to feel that they are sincere in their concern for your welfare and that they will be able to help you impersonally. They will not be putting their own personality on you, or sometimes your mother can help you, sometimes your mother's not the best. It just depends. But I think that's why when Yogananda went to America, he called it self-realization fellowship, which is actually a contradiction. And that's why he recommended spiritual communities. And that's why we gather in a center, because in this day and age, it's very difficult to figure it out by yourself. And so we need to pay attention to each other. And we get into this false idea that because I have my own relationship with God and Guru, self-realization, that the only way God will speak to me is through me. And it doesn't occur to us that God could also tell somebody else something that I should know. And so it's very, very helpful to build those relationships in, so that as issues arise in your spiritual life, which I promise you inevitably they will, of one form or another, that you have a mirror. And you don't have to mindlessly obey, because, people are sometimes more right than other times. But if you don't have anyone, it's a lot harder road to follow. Does that make sense? Because on this path, one of the characteristics of this path is that even though we have deep experiences, we tend not to have weird experiences. It's a balanced path. It's just the way this works. And if it's not working that way for you, you might need to figure out how to get more balanced in it. Because we don't always move evenly, but, I didn't know what happened. I thought Master fell off the wall, but he was already there. Okay. Any other questions?
Do chakras have its own energy?
I'm sorry, you'll have to say it again.
Chakras, do have their own energy?
Do the chakras have their own energy?
Or it is getting energized through Kundalini?
And then say the second part again for me.
Do the chakras have their own energy?
That part I got. And the second part was?
Or they getting energy through Kundalini?
The chakras, all energy is Kundalini energy. All the energy in your spine is the Kundalini. Think of it like a river. It's exactly like a river. The water of the river manifests as the whirlpool, but it's integrally attached to the river, and when it goes back in, it's exactly the same as the river. That's what the chakras are. It's the Kundalini energy caught in a whirlpool. But then once every chakra has characteristic qualities, because they represent a vibration of consciousness on that spectrum. That's not like exactly true, but that's a way to think about it, if that makes sense. Okay? Does that answer that question? The chakras don't exist as an origin point of anything. Chakra means wheel. It's energy moving in a particular pattern. It's not in itself an originating force. The sperm and the ovum come together, the energy creates this, and it's a total energy pattern. But you can't just pull this one chakra out and say it's doing anything. It's the whole pattern of energy. And the chakras in relationship to each other, and the force of one versus another, this desire versus that desire, this concentrated energy versus You see what I mean? So it's not like one thing makes something happen. It's like a solar system. It's all, you can identify the separate parts, but the energy all plays together to create who we are. You know, in a solar system, if the orbit of one changes, then everything has to change because it's all related. You can't just isolate one piece of it. That's what I meant by that. Sometimes when women have come to me with troubles in their families, I say, well, you know, your family is a solar system. If your gravitational pull in your orbit shifts, then everybody else is going to have to shift too. So maybe it's better just to work with yourself and not worry about everyone else. Your chakras are a little bit of the same thing. I don't think that's a perfectly clear image, but I hope it helps. Yes?
Thank you for this wonderful discourse. I just wanted to ask you, how common is the awakening of Kundalini in those who take this spiritual path of Kriya Yoga?
The awakening of Kundalini is the shifting of the balance of your internal energy, the shifting of the karma in the chakras, the internalization of the energy, the ability to hold the energy at the spiritual eye, which completely changes the way you relate to the world and the way you feel about yourself. On this spiritual path, you can reinvent yourself every couple of months. You can become somebody you never imagined you could be. You can change your fundamental characteristics, and you can be happy all the time. So the answer to that is enormous, infinite, fabulous.
How common is it in those who are following this path? I mean, is it common?
I have never I've been part of Ananda for 40 years. I've traveled to all of our communities. I've known people from the same age I started till now. I have never known a group of people, and I'm talking hundreds, who are so consistently good, so honorable, so selfless, so dedicated, so joyful. So I know it's very, very common on this path because I've seen it. I've seen it for myself, and I've seen it in just so many others that, as Swami Kriyananda says, if you see one or two people like that, you think, oh, they have good karma, you know, they're a special person, they're lucky. But when you see it consistently in different places, different countries, different cultures, you have to realize it's what they're doing. So I testify from my own experience. If you practice, it works. And it works beyond your wildest imaginings, because once you start raising the Kundalini, shifting the pattern in the chakras, everything changes. You can sort of hear that theoretically, but like a lifelong addiction that you absolutely could not get rid of just goes away. And you just don't even know. You don't even know yourself. I mean, it may not go away in a year. Might take longer, maybe it will go away. But it's just like your very self-definition just changes. And you realize how limitless are the possibilities. Then you begin to think of things like grace of God and Guru, and it all plays together. But yes, a resounding yes to that, okay? Let me take one or two more, if there are one or two more.
That means it's not a physical phenomenon.
Pardon me, slow down when you speak. I'm trying to talk slow, and you have to do the favor to me.
The raising of Kundalini, it's not a physical phenomenon that like you see some flashing lights or something of that sort. Is it the way you start thinking that changes?
Is the raising of Kundalini a physical phenomenon? Well, sometimes it comes with marvelous, visions and colors and lights and so on, and sometimes it doesn't at all. This path is not defined by that kind of phenomenon. And a characteristic of Kriya Yogis is that as a group, we don't get a lot of that. Now, Indians are much more inclined to have those kinds of experiences than Americans, because Americans are so rational, and it's just so trained into us to be rational, whereas in your culture, there's just a lot a lot more intuitive receptivity. So I would want to just sort of stand back a little bit and see what happens in this country before I declare that. At the same time, what really matters is not a phenomenal experience. What really matters is the ability in every situation to choose happiness. And choosing happiness, Jaya was asked that. You all know Jaya, he's one of the leaders here. Someone asked him the results of this path. He's very thoughtful, he paused for a long time, and he said, I have found that, I think he may have said in every, but certainly something close to that, I have the ability now to choose happiness. Think about what that means. And that's the real rising of the Kundalini, because the energy is not being dissipated. You're able to pull it to here and focus it. It's nice to have lights and visions, why not? But the ability to choose happiness is really the sign of the grace of God in your relationship to Him. Yes?
Does it demand 100% abstinence?
100%.
Abstinence.
Abstinence, sexual abstinence, you mean? No, everything is directional. You know, the nature of this path is you move toward, okay, everything is, the only way you can get to there is from here. You can't get to there by just sort of suddenly being there. So if your goal is to transcend the body and to not be compelled by any aspect of physical life, people focus on sex, but the fact is the body compels us to do all sorts of things, to eat, to sleep, to scratch when we itch, to bathe, sex is a very strong compulsion, but it's just a physical compulsion. So to imagine that we can get rid of a physical compulsion just by deciding that we will is not very realistic. So what we want to do is we want to say that's where I'm going, and then we want to take a balanced approach that will actually allow us to move in that direction. I mean, yes, many young men become brahmacharis and remain brahmacharis, but you don't know how many lifetimes before they have been working to change their self-definition, to understand where their happiness comes from, to not think with longing or regret about experiences that they are or are not having. So it's definitely worthwhile to move toward abstinence. But if the preoccupation with abstinence makes it hard for you to do anything else, it's probably better to take a more moderate attitude toward that. Of course, not everyone has not everyone has a sexual partner, so sometimes God imposes abstinence on you. And if He does, He does. And then you figure that I'm going to be able to learn from this. And then one does one's best with that. But don't make the mistake that mere celibacy creates spirituality. It does not. Many times celibacy just simply creates an enormous obsession with sexuality, and that is not freedom. You're not defined by your actions, you're defined by your consciousness. So, sometimes a healthy, monogamous, moderate sexual relationship is a much more spiritually beneficial life for a person than celibacy, because it takes care of that energy and allows you to build gradually to a higher level. So, Lahiri Mahashaya, when Babaji gave him Kriya, Babaji said to Lahiri, this is an autobiography of a yogi, give this technique to those who are willing to renounce everything for the search for God, everything. That would obviously mean a celibate life, family life. Lahiri Mahashaya said to Babaji, I guess I won't be initiating a lot of people, is sort of what he said. But what he really said is very few have the capacity to leap that far. But many people could grow stronger if they had Kriya. And then Babaji lessened the restrictions on Kriya, because the practice of Kriya itself will free us from physical compulsions and then make that kind of dedication possible. So it's part of this path to think of it in a much more balanced, integrated way and not a black or white manner. Okay? What Swamiji has said, and I think I love the way he puts it, sex is merely a physical compulsion. Ultimately, all physical compulsions have to be overcome. But let's not separate it out quite so strongly, because then we get this oppositional energy. Celibate means spiritual, non-celibate means not spiritual. And really, physical compulsions are a longing that have to be overcome, but we have to learn it in our own way from experience. Fair enough? It's a very important question. It's much more subtle that can be said about it, but in this context, that would be the best I would answer. Did you have a question, sir?
My question is it possible to scan the blockages in the process of rising of the Kundalini?
To scan them, what do you mean by that word?
Can one
Perceive what they are?
perceive where
Yeah.
the blockages are?
Oh, yeah.
Are these due to these causes?
People who have either strong intuition, expanded sight, particular healing abilities, can feel or see what your energy pattern is. I mean, there's many people who can do that. And sometimes they can do it accurately. Sometimes they can perceive patterns but don't interpret them properly. There's even photographic programs that can take pictures of the energies in the chakras. Yeah, Carillion photograph, and in Pune they have one of those machines that can take pictures of your chakras. Fascinating. So yes, it's easily possible. The physical eyes can't see it, but you have many other senses that you can develop. So it's possible that you can be helped to understand your reality by people who have that capacity to perceive. Or else it simply is revealed to you as you need to know it. And some people have the capacity to put enough energy into your system to actually shift those energies. But that is a rare person who can do that. Many people say they can, but not many actually can. But I don't want to cast aspersions on those who can, because it's a theoretical possibility. Does that make sense?
But is it possible for the individual to identify the blockages? Is there a way where you don't have to depend on outsiders, whether they are telling the truth or they are...
Well, yes, of course, it's possible to completely understand yourself. It's possible to perceive all of that, but it takes very elevated sight to do so. And in a certain sense, it's not necessary to do that. If you concentrate at the spiritual eye and increase the flow of the river, the blockages will automatically be dissolved by right practice. But what I've found is, as your consciousness expands, those understandings come to you spontaneously. And that without even seeking it, suddenly you say, oh, I understand. And sometimes it happens in meditation, sometimes you're just walking down the street, and just all of a sudden you recognize something. And I know that's because the energy is rising, the intuition is increasing, the blockages are dissolving. And that's what I meant by it's a very balanced kind of development. In the moment that you need to know, it comes out. I'm going to give you one last thing and then we'll stop because we have to have dinner. This is a paper clip here. And if I had a magnet, I would be able to pick up this paper clip. Okay? Imagine that all your karma is a whole bunch of paper clips buried in your spine, covered over with sand. And every time you do a spiritual practice, whether I'll just say every time you do Kriya or any of the preliminary steps to Kriya or any spiritual practice that is genuine, you're like passing a magnet over the sand where the paper clips of your karma are buried. As you increase your capacity to do your spiritual practice, that magnet gets more and more energy. And as it goes over there, now let's say the paper clips are buried at all different levels. Each time you pass the magnet over, those little paper clips begin to squirm toward the surface, right? And they come to the surface in exact relationship to the power of the magnet and the frequency with which it comes. So that's the basis of the statement. God never gives you a test greater than you can handle. That sounds like a sentimental statement, but the paperclip of karma does not come out of the sand until the magnet of energy flowing upward toward the divine is strong enough to pull it out. And when that exact moment is reached, the paperclip hits the magnet. And either it then just smoothly, adheres to the magnet and that's the end of it, or sometimes it hits the magnet with a huge whack like that, and then all this stuff happens. My belief, from my own experience, is that all those karmas are things I don't know about myself, and they scoot to the surface, and that's what it's like, oh. And I don't need to dig around in the sand, because the only thing that matters is that I keep moving the magnet. If I keep moving the magnet, everything takes care of itself. That's the other reason why people say, don't worry about anything, just meditate. And that's also true. Because if you just keep moving that magnet, all those little paper clips will come out, and eventually there won't be any more. No karma, clear chakras, Kundalini rising. Okay. Okay, I'm sorry, this gentleman has one more. Okay.
By awakening Kundalini,
Yeah.
Rising Kundalini, what will I get? After that, I will get happiness. By that, what will I get after
When
the Kundalini?
Everything, all positive. Go ahead. Excuse me.
If just happiness, that I am already I am happy. I am happy without reason. So what is the use for me to awaken my Kundalini? What will I get extra?
Okay, let's raise the stakes from happiness to pure unconditional bliss. So raising Kundalini moves you from mere happiness to pure unconditional bliss. Raising Kundalini rises you eventually to Sat Chit Ananda, ever existing, ever conscious, ever new joy. Whatever we're experiencing now that we consider positive is a shadow of the infinite state that's possible. And what I just described about, and this is the state of the masters. What raising Kundalini gives us is this. And if you're not here, and in your consciousness, then something better than you have will come to you from raising the Kundalini.